Alarms blaring. Red lights flashing in the steel corridors of a secret undersea fortress. One woman, alone, sits locked into the enemy's nervous system, her nose bleeding as she fights a machine that wants to crush her mind. The mission? Impossible. The odds? Hopeless. And yet, she held the line. My friends, this is not the story of a medal polished and displayed. It's the story of a badge tarnished by salt and blood, carried by someone who never asked for glory, only survival. Stay with me, and you'll discover the forgotten legacy of Elena Vargas. Ocean Sentinel. Morning at the Norfolk training compound was damp, the kind of briny air that crept through concrete walls and left a taste of salt on the tongue. The wind off the Atlantic pressed against the buildings, carrying that sharp, metallic tang of the ocean. Elena Vargas moved down the corridor with the steady rhythm of someone who'd walked it 1,000 times. Her soft-soled shoes thudded against the floor in even beats, no wasted motion, no hesitation. She no longer wore a Navy uniform. Those days had ended long ago. Instead, she had the civilian gray of a systems supervisor. Simple, functional. Pinned just off her left collar sat a small piece of tarnished silver. Scratched, dull, almost invisible unless the light caught it just right. A badge. To most, it looked like nothing. A relic, maybe. A cheap trinket. But to Vargas, it was the last thread tying her to a life she could never fully leave behind, no matter how hard she tried. She'd heard the whispers before, why does she keep that thing? And ignored them all. She never explained. The training hall buzzed with low chatter. 30 young officers stood in formation, nerves stretched taut. Today was different. The new civilian director was coming through for inspection. Word traveled fast. William Croft, career bureaucrat, long resume in defense contracts, zero combat experience. A man who knew how to climb, not how to fight. When Croft arrived, he filled the doorway like he owned the place. Tall, broad in the middle, dressed in a sharp navy suit that hugged his bulk. His hair, silvered at the temples, was slicked back with the kind of shine only a mirror and too much product could give. The smile on his face wasn't friendly. It was the grin of someone used to pulling strings. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice rolling through the chamber. "I've heard this facility prides itself on discipline. Let's see if that reputation holds." He strolled the line like a man on parade, pausing here and there to bark a correction, to tug at a sleeve, to snap at posture. His words weren't guidance. They were theater. His theater. Then his eyes landed on Elena. She knew before he opened his mouth. "And you are?" Croft cocked his head, studying her. "Not in uniform." "Civilian staff, I take it?" "Elena Vargas," she said evenly. "System security and technical training." Croft's gaze dropped, narrowing in on the small badge pinned to her collar. He leaned closer, lips curling. "What's this little trinket?" Her hand twitched at her side. She held her ground. Croft jabbed a finger toward it. "Some kind of jewelry? A keepsake? Doesn't look like anything that belongs in regulation. Frankly, it looks like something you picked up at a pawn shop down by the docks." A ripple of whispers moved through the ranks. Curious eyes darted her way. Croft chuckled at his own joke, the sound sharp and cutting. Elena didn't answer. She'd learned long ago that silence was its own kind of shield. But the silence wasn't submission. It was heavier, more deliberate. She locked her gaze on him, calm. Unreadable. He mistook it for surrender. "In this facility," Croft announced, pivoting toward the entire room, "we train for the future, not the past. I don't want to see anyone clinging to outdated, meaningless relics. Do you understand?" He spat the last word past like it was something foul. Some of the younger officers shifted uncomfortably. They didn't know what the badge meant, but they recognized disrespect when they heard it. Elena breathed in slowly. She felt no anger had been burned out of her years ago. What remained was a bone-deep exhaustion. People like Croft would never understand. To them, courage and sacrifice were line items in a report, never scars carried on skin and soul. And still, memories surged, the wail of sonar pinging in her headset, the flash of red lights in a steel corridor, the taste of salt water in her mouth as a voice crackled over Combs. "Vargas, we're boxed in. We need you now." She blinked it away. The hall came back into focus. Croft loomed, smug, convinced he'd made his point. But the air shifted when the back door swung open. The squeal of hinges echoed. Every head turned. A tall figure stepped inside, the sunlight from the corridor outlining his shoulders in gold. His uniform was crisp, his bearing sharp as a blade. Weathered skin, eyes dark and cutting. Authority walked in with him. The whispers were immediate. "Colonel Marcus Harlow." Croft straightened, startled but quick to mask it with a grin. "Colonel." Perfect timing. Harlow didn't let him finish. His gaze had already fixed on Elena's badge. He froze. For a beat, the room held its breath. The only sound was the low hum of the ventilation system. Then Harlow moved forward, voice low but steady, each word striking like a drumbeat. "You just mocked one of the rarest insignias in the Navy, Ocean Sentinel." The words hung in the air like a THUNDERCLAP. Ocean Sentinel. The room seemed to fold in on itself. The young officers stiff, Croft's smirk faltering. All eyes snapping back to Elena. She felt their stares, but her mind had already drifted elsewhere, pulled backward by the gravity of Harlow's voice. Ocean Sentinel wasn't a phrase. It was a world. A crucible. A ghost that had never let her go. 16 years earlier, the bus had smelled of diesel and sweat. 40 recruits crammed shoulder to shoulder, faces young and hard, some pale with nerves, others buzzing with cocky bravado. Elena had sat in the middle row, hands locked around the strap of her duffel bag, trying not to show the storm inside. She was 22. The daughter of immigrants who'd clawed their way into the States with little more than grit and borrowed faith. Norfolk had been steel yards and night shifts, her father's hands torn raw from factory work, her mother bending double over sewing machines. The Navy was supposed to be a path out. But this was something else. Ocean Sentinel wasn't on the brochures. It didn't have a recruitment booth or glossy posters. It was an invitation whispered through the chain of command. Candidates were scouted, not volunteers. And once you said yes, there was no turning back. The bus braked hard. Doors hissed open. They stepped out into darkness. A pier stretched into black water, the Atlantic a restless void under a starless sky. Beyond it loomed a compound of concrete and steel, floodlights glaring down like judgment. "Welcome to hell," one of the instructors barked. Training was designed to break them, body and soul. Days blurred into nights, nights into days, until time itself lost meaning. They ran until their lungs bled, dove into freezing surf until their skin went numb, strapped themselves into blackout tanks where sonar pings hammered their skulls until they thought their brains would crack. Elena discovered quickly that muscles alone didn't matter here. Bravado died fast. Ocean Sentinel was about endurance of the mind, the ability to stay conscious inside chaos, to think when everything screamed at you to surrender. She learned the language of machines. Weeks spent hunched over consoles, fingers raw from constant calibration. She was drilled on undersea drones, sonar arrays, encryption keys, electronic warfare systems that most of the Navy didn't even know existed. The instructors had a phrase: "You don't fight the ocean. You vanish inside it." By the third month, half the class had washed out. Some left broken bones. Some left broken while Elena stayed. One night, long after lights out, she sat alone on the edge of the pier, boots dangling above the water. The sky was clear for once, a scatter of stars reflected in the black Atlantic. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but her mind burned. She thought of her father's voice. "Mia, the ocean takes what it wants. You respect it, or it swallows you. And here she was, learning to slip into that hunger, to become invisible inside the deep. She clenched the badge they'd given her, not the silver one yet, just a plain training token, stamped metal and sharp edges. Her fingers dug into it until her skin stung. She whispered to herself, "I won't be swallowed." Weeks became months. The class dwindled to 9. The final test came without warning. A siren jolted them awake at 0300. Orders shoved into their hands. Infiltrate a simulated enemy facility. Disarm its sonar net and extract before sunrise. Fail, and you were done. They plunged into the Atlantic in full gear, night vision goggles painting the world in ghostly green. The water was a living weight, pressing against her chest, cold slicing through her suit. Every stroke of her arms felt like a negotiation with the abyss. Halfway through, one recruit panicked, hyperventilating, thrashing. The instructors didn't intervene. They never did. Elena forced herself to grab him, slam her palm across his mask, shout through her regulator, "Breathe!" He calmed, barely, enough to finish dot at the facility's perimeter. She wired into the sonar grid, fingers trembling from the cold. Numbers swam before her eyes, strings of code she'd memorized in sleepless nights. She rerouted frequencies, folded ghost signals back into the system until their presence dissolved into the noise. When the green light blinked, her chest almost burst. They slipped through undetected dot by dawn, when the last of them staggered back onto the beach. Coated in salt and sand, an instructor stood waiting. He held a small black case. Inside, gleaming silver, the Ocean Sentinel badge. "Out of the 40 that started," he said, voice flat, "you 9 remain. You'll wear this not for glory, not for show. You'll wear it because you survived." Elena's hand shook as the metal pressed into her palm. The badge was heavier than it looked, and in that moment, she understood it wasn't a reward. It was a burden. Back in the present, Elena blinked, pulled from the memory. The training hall was silent, every eye still on her. Croft looked pale, like a man who'd accidentally mocked a relic from a church altar. Colonel Harlow's voice cut through the quiet again. "Steady, final. That badge isn't decoration. It's proof. And only a handful in this country have earned the right to wear it." Elena stood still, the echo of the past roaring in her chest dot, and yet, the memories weren't finished with her dot, because survival in training was only the beginning. The badge wasn't truly hers until the night everything bled red in the deep. The badge was barely a week old when Elena boarded her first deployment. The plane that carried them had no markings, no tail insignia. Just a steel belly packed with equipment, the hum of engines drowning every thought. Around her sat the rest of her graduating cohort, 8 others who'd survived the gauntlet. Their faces were hard, eyes hollowed out by the same sleepless nights. But beneath that iron front was the same thing Elena felt, the gnawing question of whether training had been enough. They were no longer candidates. They were assets. The mission was a simple proof of concept. Slip into contested waters off the Horn of Africa, tap an undersea fiber line used by insurgent networks, and ghost back out without leaving a ripple. Simple, except the currents slammed like fists, dragging them sideways as they swam through black water so thick it felt alive. Except the enemy patrol boat drifted overhead, its spotlight spearing the sea, sweeping close enough that Elena could see barnacles crusting its hull. Except the line itself was buried beneath a lattice of sensors, wired to trigger alarms at the faintest vibration. She lay in the mud with her toolkit, fingers numb, teeth chattering against her regulator. One wrong touch, and the ocean would light up with hostile sonar. The voices of her instructors echoed in her skull. "You don't fight the ocean. You vanish inside it." She vanished by dawn. The data was flowing, their presence erased like they'd never been there. When they surfaced miles offshore, the horizon bleeding pink with morning light, Elena felt something she hadn't during training. Not pride, not relief, addiction. The ocean had swallowed her whole, and she'd learned how to breathe inside it. Months bled together. Missions blurred, cutting undersea cables in the South China Sea, planting false beacons along disputed coastlines, shadowing submarines so quietly that entire crews never knew they'd been haunted. Each time, the sentinel badge on her collar dulled a little more, scratched by salt, battered by gear straps. But the weight of it grew. The work was never celebrated. Reports were redacted, operations sealed, names erased. They were the shadows behind headlines that never made the news. And for Elena, the silence was both armor and curse. Then came the briefing that shifted everything. The room was windowless, humming with recycled air. A projector lit up the wall with a schematic, a sprawling undersea installation carved into rock, its tunnels threading deep into the continental shelf. Target code name, Leviathan, the commander said. His voice was calm, detached, like he was describing a warehouse, not a fortress. Facility houses classified bioweapons under development by hostile actors. Retrieval team will consist of SEAL Unit Delta 9. Ocean Sentinel will provide insertion support, electronic disruption, and exfiltration cover. Elena leaned forward. The map glowed. Arteries of steel and sonar arrays branching outward like a living organism. Intel indicates reinforced patrols, redundant power systems, and overlapping sonar nets, the commander went on. In other words, hell. The room was silent. Everyone understood. If things went wrong inside Leviathan, there would be no cavalry, no headlines, no rescue. They'd vanish under the ocean like a stone. That night, lying on her bunk, Elena couldn't sleep. The hum of the ventilation reminded her of sonar echoes. She stared at the badge resting on the shelf above her, the scratches catching dim light. She thought of her father's warning. The ocean takes what it wants, and she whispered back, voice barely audible even to herself, then let it take me last. Back in the present, Croft still stood in stunned silence in that training hall, his arrogance bleeding away under Harlow's steady gaze. The young officers hadn't moved, as if afraid to even breathe. Elena's eyes drifted to the badge on her collar, tarnished, faded, but to her it wasn't a relic, it was a doorway, and the door was opening, because Leviathan was waiting. The sea was black, that night. The kind of black that swallowed light whole, that pressed against your mask until you couldn't tell where ocean ended and sky began. Elena slid from the Zodiac into that void, the cold stabbing straight through her suit. Around her, the SEAL team moved like phantoms, their silhouettes dissolving into the current. Coms crackled in her ear, a string of clipped call signs and time hacks. Delta 9, you're green. Sentinels, we're on your 6. Her regulator hissed with every breath. Her pulse drummed in her ears. Ahead, the Leviathan loomed. Not the creature, though it felt like one, but the facility itself. A fortress built into the continental shelf, its outer shell bristling with sonar arrays, like spines along the back of some submerged beast. Lines of light glowed faint beneath the water, power conduits snaking into the depths. It was alive, breathing, waiting. The first approach was a crawl. Hands digging into rock, fins barely stirring silt. Every movement calculated. Too fast and the sonar nets would ripple, alarms cascading through the base before they ever touched steel. Elena led the crawl, gear strapped tight to her chest, a compact terminal, spools of cable, encryption modules, her weapons. The badge under her suit pressed cold against her collarbone. At the perimeter, she found the junction node, a cluster of conduits guarded by 2 rotating sonar eyes. Their sweep lines cut across the seabed, slow, steady, merciless. She waited, counted beats in her head. 1, 2. On 3 she surged forward, body flat to the ground, sliding into the blind zone. Her fingers worked fast, popping the seal on the node, splicing in the ghost circuit. Code streamed across her visor. The sonar pulse fractured, split into dozens of phantom echoes, folding in on themselves. For a moment, the base went blind. Nets open, she whispered. The seals slipped past like shadows, into a tunnel mouth yawning ahead. Inside was worse. The tunnel walls sweated with condensation, steel plates groaning under the weight of ocean above. Red emergency lights pulsed down the corridor in rhythmic beats like the heartbeat of the beast. They advanced in silence, rifles raised. Elena kept to the rear, lugging her terminal. Every 50 yards, she jacked into panels, scrambling cameras, looping feeds, but the deeper they pushed, the louder the facility seemed to breathe. Fans roared overhead. Hydraulic doors hissed. Somewhere in the distance, boots clanged against metal grating patrols. The SEAL leader held a fist in the air. Stop. Elena froze. A patrol rounded the corner ahead. 2 guards in dark fatigues. Rifles slung casual, bored. The SEALs melted into shadows. One swift motion, muffled shots, bodies slumping before they could cry out. Elena's stomach clenched. Training prepared her for cold water, for code. Not for the sound of breath leaving a dying man's throat. She swallowed it down, forced her eyes forward. Keep moving. At the heart of Leviathan lay the control core, a chamber pulsing with blue light, banks of servers stacked high, cables webbing across the ceiling. The hum was deafening, a vibration that rattled teeth. Elena set her kit down, hands trembling but precise. She patched in, and the world exploded into streams of code, security grids, sonar webs, power cycles, all of it lit up before her. It was a labyrinth, a living nervous system. And she was inside it, but it wasn't passive. The system fought back. Firewalls snapped shut like jaws. Counterscripts lunged at her intrusion. She pushed deeper, faster, mind-burning as she rerouted, split signals, sent echoes chasing ghosts, sweat beaded under her mask. Her nose began to bleed. Vargas, the leader's voice cut through. We're on a clock. We need the blackout. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Every neuron was locked in the duel with the machine. And then she found it. The central switch. Buried deep, hidden under layers of decoys. She reached for it, fingers trembling over keys. The base CONVULC doodout lights flickered. Sirens wailed, the hum of machinery choked into silence. Doors slammed open and shut, klaxons shriek in confusion. Through comms, she heard shouts in another language, panic, disbelief. The facility was blind, deaf, thrashing against itself. Move! The SEAL leader barked. Gunfire erupted, echoing down steel corridors. Elena staggered to her feet, blood dripping from her nose, vision swimming. She clutched her terminal, half dragged, half pushed as the team fought their way back through the beast's arteries. Every step was chaos. Red lights flared, doors ground shut inches from cutting them off. She overrode locks on the fly, hands slick with sweat and blood, forcing systems to obey. Her head felt like it was splitting apart, but she kept going. They burst into the tunnel mouth, the ocean yawning ahead. Behind them, Leviathan roared in fury, sirens wailing. Metal screaming, they plunged into black water. Rifles slung, fins kicking hard, hearts hammering. Elena's body felt hollow, her mind still tethered to the machine she'd broken. Phantom echoes chased her, lines of code flashing behind her eyes, but the sea held them. Carried them out, away, into the night. Hours later, aboard the extraction sub, silence reigned. The SEALs sat slumped, faces pale, eyes wide with the kind of exhaustion only survival could bring. Elena sat apart, badge cold against her skin. She pressed it with trembling fingers, nails biting into metal. One of the SEALs broke the silence. Voice low, reverent, "You saved us, Vargas." She didn't answer. She couldn't, because deep down, she knew the truth. Part of her hadn't come back. Part of her was still down there, tangled in Leviathan's steel guts, screaming with the alarms. The debriefing room was quiet, too quiet. A steel table, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Walls painted the same lifeless gray as every other classified bunker she'd ever seen. Alina sat rigid, hands folded in her lap, knuckles white. The taste of copper still lingered in her mouth from the nosebleed dot across the table. Two officers in starched uniforms scribbled notes, their questions flat and perfunctory. Confirm. Blackout initiated at 0237 hours? Yes. Duration? 8 minutes 42 seconds. Enemy response? Uncoordinated. They were blind. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. The SEALs gave their own accounts in separate rooms. She imagined them describing the chaos, the gunfire, the doors slamming shut, how she'd cracked open the beast from inside. But in here, stripped of blood and adrenaline, it all felt hollow. When it was over, one of the officers shut his folder, expression unreadable. Effective work, Vargas. The Sentinel program justified itself tonight. She nodded once. That was all. No applause. No ceremony. Just a closed file and the hum of lights. Later in the barracks, the team gathered in silence. Gears stowed. Rifles cleaned. No one spoke until their leader Grizzled, steady-eyed, looked at Alina across the room. You did more than your part, he said quietly. Every head turned toward her. The SEAL who'd spoken on the sub earlier repeated himself, firmer this time. You saved us. Alina forced a smile. It didn't reach her eyes, because the truth was louder in her head. I barely made it back. Sleep never came easy after Leviathan. She'd close her eyes and hear the sirens again, that rising wail echoing down steel corridors. She'd see red lights pulsing against wet walls. Worse, she'd feel the system still clawing at her mind, the sensation of being locked in combat with a machine that wasn't alive, but knew exactly how to hurt her. More than once, she woke gasping, tangled in sweat-drenched sheets, convinced she was still underwater. The badge, when she looked at it, felt heavier. Not a medal. A weight. Months passed. More missions came. She carried them out, efficient, unflinching. To everyone else, Vargas was unshakable, reliable, the one who could ghost a sonar net with her eyes half shut, who could make an enemy base think it was being attacked by a fleet that didn't exist. But every mission took something from her. She started sitting alone after deployments, staring at the sea like it might answer a question she didn't know how to ask. She grew quieter, the humor she once had evaporating, replaced by a watchful stillness. She wasn't breaking. She was eroding. Then came the moment she couldn't ignore. A mission in the Baltic, shallow waters, heavy ice. The app was smooth, no alarms, no resistance. But when they surfaced, she found herself frozen, mask still on, unable to unclench her jaw. Her hands shook so badly she couldn't pull the regulator free. A SEAL had to do it for her, prying the gear from her face, concern flickering in his eyes. You okay? He asked. She forced herself to nod. But the truth was sharp, undeniable. The ocean wasn't letting her go. Her request for reassignment surprised no one. Not the commander, not her teammates. You've given more than enough, the colonel told her in private. He didn't say the rest out loud, but she heard it anyway. And if you keep going, you'll lose yourself. So she left. Not dishonorably. Not in shame. Just quietly. The Ocean Sentinel badge followed her into civilian life, pinned to her collar like a ghost. She took a post as a systems supervisor at Norfolk, away from Black Ops missions and midnight dives. A job that was steady, contained, ordinary. But she never took the badge off, because no matter how tarnished, it was the one truth she still carried. Back in the present, Colonel Harlow's words still rang in the training hall. That badge isn't decoration. It's proof. And only a handful in this country have earned the right to wear it. The young officer stared at her in silence, respect replacing doubt. Croft shifted uncomfortably, color draining from his face. Elena stood still, heart steady, eyes unreadable. The ocean had taken plenty from her. But not this. Never this. Silence. The training hall had gone utterly still after Harlow's words. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed muted, as though the building itself was listening. Croft's smug expression had drained into something brittle. He glanced from Harlow to Alina and back again, his lips parting but no sound coming out. The young officers watched him like they were witnessing a man walk into his own grave. Harlow's gaze stayed locked on the badge pinned to Elena's collar. His voice dropped lower, but it carried like a blade through the air. Only 143 people have ever worn it. Ocean Sentinel. She's one of them. And she came back alive. A ripple moved through the formation. Shoulders straightened. Eyes sharpened. Respect, the real kind. The kind that can't be demanded, settled over the room. Elena stood motionless, hands clasped behind her back, expression calm. Inside, though, she felt the weight of every eye, every unspoken question. She didn't flinch, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge the revelation at all. That silence, once mistaken for submission, now carried a different gravity. Croft cleared his throat, the sound small in the cavernous room. He tried to recover his footing, tugging at his tie, but his voice cracked. I wasn't aware, he muttered. Harlow turned his head slowly, fixing Croft with a stare so cold it might have frozen salt water. No, you weren't, and maybe that's the problem. The young officers shifted. Some hid their smirks. Others let their eyes linger on Croft, judgment plain. For the first time since stepping into the facility, Croft looked smaller than the room he thought he controlled. He glanced at Elena, as though searching for an out, some lifeline to pull him free. But Elena gave him nothing. Just that steady, unreadable look, the same one she'd given enemies, machines, and the ocean itself. The moment stretched, taut as wire. Finally, Croft swallowed hard. Ms. Vargas. My apologies. I spoke out of turn. His words fell flat. They weren't for her. They were for the room, for the witnesses. But apologies have a way of exposing weakness when they come too late. Elena dipped her head a fraction. Not in forgiveness. Not in acknowledgement. Just enough to signal that the matter was closed, at least on her end. The real judgment wasn't hers to give. It already lived in the eyes of the men and women watching. Harlow broke the tension with a sharp command. Formation dismissed. The young officers snapped to, saluting before filing out. But their glances lingered on Elena as they passed. Curiosity, awe, respect. Not one of them looked at Croft. Within moments, the hall was nearly empty. Just Croft, stiff and humiliated, Harlow steady as stone, and Elena Badge catching the dim light, silent as the deep dot as the doors clanged shut behind the last officer. Croft exhaled sharply, the fight gone from him. Colonel, Harlow cut him off with a curt wave. Save it. He turned to Elena, and for the first time his eyes softened. Just slightly. Enough for her to see the recognition there. You don't need me to say it, he murmured. But it matters that they know. Elena inclined her head. Her throat was tight, but she forced out two quiet words. Thank you. Croft shuffled out without another word, his footsteps echoing like a retreat. Elena stayed behind, alone in the vast training hall. The silence returned, but now it wasn't suffocating. It was steady. She reached up, fingers brushing the tarnished badge on her collar. So many years, so much blood and noise, condensed into this small piece of metal. To the unknowing, it was nothing. To those who understood, it was everything. And to her, it was a reminder that she had faced the dark and returned. She let her hand drop, drew in a breath. The day's work wasn't over. Young officers still needed guidance. Systems still needed supervision. Life went on, ordinary on the surface. But beneath it, in the silence only she could hear, the ocean still whispered. And Elena Vargas, Ocean Sentinel, stood steady. By the next morning, the story had already spread. Elena could feel it in the way conversations hushed when she entered a room. in the way young officers straightened their posture when she walked past. The training compound had a rhythm, a low hum of chatter and banter. Now that hum changed when she was near quieter, sharper, tinged with something new. Respect. And distance. She caught fragments as she passed the mess hall. Sentinel, right? That's what Harlow said. Only 100-something in history. She doesn't even talk about it. Crazy. Elena set her tray down at an empty table, the clatter echoing louder than it should have. Nobody joined her. Not because they didn't want to. Because they didn't know how. That evening, she walked the perimeter alone. The compound fence buzzed faintly, the ocean stretching beyond it like an endless, breathing presence. She thought of Croft's laughter the day before, how easily he'd dismissed the badge. Then she thought of the hush that fell after Harlow spoke, how quickly reverence replaced mockery. Two sides of the same coin. Both of them wrong in their own way. The badge wasn't for ridicule. But it wasn't for worship, either. It was a weight. Every time she touched it, she felt not the pride of survival, but the gravity of memory. Red lights, alarms, blood in her mouth, her mind tearing itself apart against Leviathan's code. The others had walked away with stories. She'd walked away with echoes that never stopped. Later, in her quarters, she sat at the small metal desk, the badge resting on the surface. The lamplight caught its scratches, scattering dull reflections against the wall. She thought about taking it off. About leaving it in the drawer, letting it gather dust where no one could see. But she knew she wouldn't, because silence was armor. And this badge, scarred, battered, was the truest kind of silence. It spoke for her when she wouldn't, when she couldn't. The officers didn't need her stories. They didn't need to hear about sonar duels or bleeding noses or dreams of drowning. All they needed to know was that she had been there, that she had come back. That was enough. The next day, during a training drill, one of the younger officers approached her after dismissal. He was tall, still boyish in the face, sweat streaking his brow. He shifted awkwardly, hands fidgeting with his gloves. "Ma'am," he said, voice low. "I just wanted to say, if there's ever a chance to learn from you, really learn, I'd take it." Elena studied him. Saw the eagerness, the hunger to prove himself. She thought of her own face years ago, riding that bus into the dark. She gave a single nod. "Be early tomorrow. I'll show you something the manuals don't teach." The relief in his eyes was almost too much to bear. That night, walking back to her quarters, she realized the silence was changing shape. It wasn't just armor anymore. It was space. Space where others could choose to step closer, if they dared, and maybe that was enough. She sat on the edge of her bunk, badge cool against her fingertips. Outside, the ocean whispered through the fences. Restless, eternal, she whispered back, a promise no one else could hear. "I'm still here. I'm still listening." Croft didn't last long. 2 weeks after his humiliating inspection, a memo circulated. Reassignment, pending review. No details, just a polite way of saying he'd been shuffled off the board. By the time his replacement arrived, Croft's name was already fading from conversation, like chalk washed clean in the rain. But Elena remained. Day after day, she walked the compound halls, drilling systems, correcting mistakes, watching new officers sharpen under her eye. The whispers about her past never truly stopped, but they softened, settling into something steadier. Respect no longer carried distance. It carried weight. No one dared joke about the tarnished badge anymore. Some even glanced at it before briefings, as if it were a quiet assurance that someone in the room had faced the abyss and returned. One evening, after a long day of drills, Elena lingered by the docks. The sun had dipped low, smearing the horizon in fire and ash. The Atlantic stretched infinite, restless, its waves beating against the pylons in a rhythm older than any war. She touched the badge on her collar. It was scarred, dulled, nothing like the gleaming silver it had once been. Time had stripped it of shine. Salt and years had etched their story into its surface. But that was the truth of it, wasn't it? The shine never mattered. The metal was only a vessel. What endured was what it represented: the nights in freezing surf, the chaos of Leviathan, the choice to return even when part of her wanted to stay buried in the deep. Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned to see the young officer from before, the one who'd asked to learn. "Ma'am," he said, nervous but determined. "You wanted me early tomorrow. I'm here now, if you'd still." Elena studied him, the earnest fire in his eyes. She thought of herself at that age, hungry, reckless, untested. A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Tomorrow," she said. "The ocean doesn't teach in one lesson." He nodded, almost grateful for the delay, and jogged back toward the barracks. Elena turned back to the sea. She closed her eyes, listening to the tide, the hiss and crash that had once felt like threat, but now sounded like memory. In her mind, echoes still lingered: sirens, gunfire, the hum of a machine fighting her to the edge of collapse. Those echoes would never leave, but neither would the other voices. The teammates she'd saved. The lives that had walked away because she hadn't let go. The ocean had taken much from her, but it had given something back too: the knowledge that courage, once earned, never rusts. She lifted the badge between her fingers, its tarnished face catching the last light of dusk. "It may fade," she whispered, voice swallowed by the wind, "but the ocean remembers." In the end, Croft's mockery faded like a ripple on the surface. But Elena remained silent, steady, carrying the weight of the deep in a small scarred badge. To the unknowing, it was just tarnished metal. To those who understood, it was proof. Courage doesn't shine, it endures. It doesn't need an audience, it needs only to be remembered. The ocean never forgets. And neither should we. If this story touched you, join us, subscribe, and be part of a community that honors courage in every form.